Before the mouse, before the castle, before his name became a synonym for childhood wonder itself, Walt Disney sat in a cramped, half-empty office, staring at a contract that had just taken everything from him. Not his money, not his studio, his very own creation, stripped away by men in suits who understood contracts better than dreams. He was 25 years old, and by every reasonable measure, he was finished. He would go bankrupt, not once, several times. He would be told again and again that his ideas were impractical, his ambitions too large, his business sense too weak to survive in a ruthless industry. Bankers would close their doors on him, partners would betray him, and yet somehow, from the wreckage of repeated failure, a nervous, stammering young man from the Midwest would build one of the most powerful storytelling empires the world has ever known. This is not a story about magic. This is a story about what happens when a person refuses to stop rebuilding. The ordinary beginning. Walter Elias Disney was born in Chicago in December of 1901, the fourth of five children in a family that never had quite enough. His father, Elias, was a man of restless ambition and harsh discipline, a carpenter, a farmer, a newspaper distributor, forever chasing a stability that always seemed to slip through his fingers. The family moved often, first to a small farm in Marceline, Missouri, then to Kansas City, each relocation driven by his father's search for a foothold that never quite held. It was in Marceline, on that modest farm, that something in young Walt began to take root. He later called it the happiest period of his childhood, the animals, the orchard, the wide open sky. He would sketch the farm animals with whatever scraps of paper he could find, discovering, almost by accident, that he could put a piece of the world onto a page and make it feel alive. But childhood on the Disney farm was not gentle. When the family's fortunes collapsed and they relocated to Kansas City, young Walt and his older brother Roy were put to work delivering newspapers for their father's paper route, before dawn, in brutal Midwest winters, for years without pay. It was grueling, thankless labor that Walt would later describe as some of the hardest years of his life. He was, by his own account, exhausted, cold, and frequently falling asleep in school from the sheer weight of the work. And yet, even in that exhaustion, the drawing never stopped. He sketched on any surface available. He earned a little money from neighbors for small illustrations. He took what art classes he could find. There was no dramatic sign yet that this quiet, hard-working boy from Missouri would change the way the entire world told stories. Only the persistent, stubborn habit of putting pencil to paper, again and again, as if some part of him already knew this was the way out. At 16, eager to serve in the First World War, but too young for the military, he lied about his age and joined the Red Cross, driving an ambulance in France after the armistice. An ambulance he decorated, tellingly, not with military insignia, but with his own cartoon drawings. Even then, in the aftermath of a devastating war, his instinct was to make something ordinary feel a little more alive. He returned to the United States with no fortune, no formal art degree, and no clear plan, only a stubborn belief that drawing was not just a hobby, it was a way forward. The impossible dream. In Kansas City, Walt found work at a commercial art studio, and it was there that animation first captured his imagination. The idea seemed almost absurd at the time. Drawings that moved, that told stories, that could make audiences laugh or cry using nothing but ink and light. Most people in the business saw animation as a novelty, a filler before the real feature. Walt saw something else entirely, a new language of storytelling that no one had fully explored. With a small camera and a borrowed workspace, he began experimenting with his own short animated films, teaching himself frame by frame, failure by failure. In 1922, barely 20 years old, he founded his first company, Laugh-O-Gram Studio, hiring a small team of young animators, including a lanky, quiet artist named Ub Iwerks, who would become one of the most important creative partnerships of Walt's life. For a moment, it looked like the beginning of something real. The studio produced modernized fairy tale shorts, and local investors took notice. But ambition outpaced resources. Contracts fell through. Payments from distributors dried up. Walt poured what little money he had into keeping the studio alive, at one point reportedly living in the office itself, and bathing at the local train station because he could no longer afford rent for an apartment. He ate irregularly. He borrowed from friends. He kept working. In 1923, Laugh-O-Gram Studio collapsed into bankruptcy. It was Walt's first true taste of financial ruin, and it would not be his last. Some historians count as many as 3 to 4 distinct business failures and near bankruptcies in the years before Walt Disney's name meant anything to the wider world. A fact largely forgotten today, buried under decades of castles and parades. At the time, none of it looked like the beginning of an empire. It looked like a young man's dream quietly dying in a rented office in Kansas City. Most people faced with that level of financial and professional collapse would have walked away. Walt did something else. With almost nothing left to his name, he packed a cardboard suitcase and boarded a train to Hollywood, California, arriving with, by most accounts, around $40 to his name and a determination that far outweighed his bank balance. The first betrayal. In California, Walt partnered again with his older brother Roy, a steady, financially minded man who would become his lifelong business anchor, the disciplined counterpart to Walt's restless imagination. Together in a garage owned by their uncle, they built the earliest version of what would become the Walt Disney Company. Their first real success came with a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, an animated star created for Universal Pictures through a distributor named Charles Mintz. Oswald was a hit. Audiences loved him. For the first time, it seemed Walt had found his footing, a character people genuinely cared about, a studio finally turning a profit, momentum finally on his side. Then came the meeting that would haunt him for the rest of his career. In 1928, Walt traveled to New York to negotiate a new contract for Oswald, expecting to secure better terms for the character he had built from nothing. Instead, Mintz delivered devastating news. Due to the way the original contract had been structured, Universal Pictures, not Walt, legally owned Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Worse, Mintz revealed he had quietly hired away most of Walt's own animators behind his back, offering them contracts to continue making Oswald cartoons without him. Walt returned to California having lost his signature character, most of his creative team, and the studio's primary source of income, all in a single trip. It was, by any measure, a devastating betrayal, a lesson delivered in the harshest possible terms. In this business, ownership mattered more than talent, and a handshake was never enough. Many would have seen this as the end. Walt saw it as an education he would never forget. The turning point. On the long train ride back to California, humiliated and stripped of his creation, Walt began sketching. Some accounts say the character emerged fully formed on that journey. Others suggest it came together over the following weeks with Works, who remained fiercely loyal and refused Mintz's offer. What is certain is this. From the wreckage of losing Oswald, a new character was born, a scrappy, big-eared mouse with an irrepressible optimism that mirrored something deep in Walt himself. This time, Walt made sure of one thing above all else. He would own what he created. No distributor, no partner, no contract loophole would ever again be allowed to take his work out from under him. The Mouse's first 2 short films struggled to find distribution. Silent cartoons were common, unremarkable, easy to ignore. But sound was just entering motion pictures, and Walt saw an opportunity nobody else in animation had fully seized. He poured what little capital remained into a 3rd short film, synchronizing the animation to a fully original musical soundtrack, something almost no one had attempted with this kind of precision before. The result was Steamboat Willie, released in November of 1928. It stunned audiences. The mouse, soon renamed Mickey, didn't just move on screen. He seemed to live, to breathe, to feel rhythm in a way animation never had before. Theaters that screened it reported audiences bursting into applause. Almost overnight, the character Walt had sketched in the depths of his worst professional humiliation became the most recognizable new star in American entertainment. The man who had lost everything just months earlier now held in a single mouse the foundation of an empire he would spend the rest of his life building. An empire built not on the failure itself, but on his refusal to let that failure be the end of the story. Building the legacy. Success did not make Walt cautious. If anything, it made him more willing to risk everything again. Through the early 1930s, as Mickey Mouse cartoons brought in the steady revenue, Walt became obsessed with a new, almost unthinkable idea: a feature-length animated film. At the time, animation existed only as short filler before the main feature. No one had ever built an entire dramatic story, 90 minutes long, out of hand-drawn animation. Industry insiders mocked the idea openly. They called it Disney's Folly. Walt mortgaged his house. He poured the studio's profits, and then some, into the production. He pushed his animators to develop techniques that had never existed before: the multiplane camera, richer color, more expressive character movement, because he refused to release something that felt like an experiment rather than a genuine work of art. In December of 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. The skeptics who had predicted disaster were stunned into silence. Audiences wept, laughed, and returned to theaters again and again. It became at the time the highest-grossing film in motion picture history, animated or otherwise. A vindication so complete that it permanently altered what people believed animation could be. From that success came an unbroken wave of ambition. Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi. Each one a further gamble, each one expanding what audiences believed animated storytelling could achieve. Walt was no longer simply making cartoons. He was building an entirely new art form, film by film, risk by risk. But his ambition would not stop at the edge of the movie screen. In the 1950s, watching his own daughters play at ordinary amusement parks, Walt grew frustrated by how dull, dirty, and uninspired most of them were. He envisioned something entirely different: an immersive, meticulously designed park where storytelling did not stop when the film ended, but continued into a physical space families could walk through together. Bankers once again doubted him. Investors called the idea financially reckless, an entertainment park with no clear precedent for success on the scale he imagined. Walt, undeterred by a lifetime of people telling him his ideas were too large, sold personal assets, borrowed heavily, and pushed forward anyway. In July of 1955, Disneyland opened in Anaheim, California. The opening day itself was, by most accounts, something close to a disaster. Counterfeit tickets flooded the gates, asphalt was still wet in the summer heat, rides broke down, and the park was dangerously overcrowded. Critics mocked it in the press the next morning. And yet, within weeks, families across America began flooding through those same gates by the millions. And Disneyland became not a punchline, but a cultural phenomenon that would permanently redefine what a theme park could be. The human side. It would be dishonest to tell this story only as an unbroken march toward triumph. Walt Disney was, above all, a deeply human figure, brilliant but flawed, visionary but exhausting to work for. Those who worked closely with him described a man of relentless, sometimes punishing perfectionism, prone to explosive frustration when a project fell short of the vision only he could fully see in his mind. His demands during the production of Snow White pushed animators to the edge of collapse, working extraordinary hours for wages that, in hindsight, badly undervalued their contribution to a film that would make the studio enormously wealthy. That tension boiled over dramatically in 1941, when animators at his studio, frustrated by unequal pay and a lack of creative credit, staged a bitter labor strike. It was a painful, deeply personal wound for Walt, who felt betrayed by employees he considered something closer to family. He never fully processed that rupture with grace. It left him more guarded, more suspicious of labor organizing, for years afterward. A genuine flaw in a man otherwise remembered almost entirely for warmth. He was, by the account of colleagues and biographers, restless to the point of near self-destruction. A heavy smoker who drove himself relentlessly, rarely satisfied, always chasing the next impossible idea even as his health quietly deteriorated under the weight of decades of stress. None of this erases what he built, but it belongs in his story because the sanitized, cheerful version of Walt Disney the world often remembers is not the whole man. The whole man was harder, more complicated, and in many ways more remarkable, precisely because greatness came bundled with real human cost. Your emotional ending. Walt Disney died in December of 1966, just after his 65th birthday, with plans for an entirely new kind of experimental city, Epcot, still unfinished on his drafting table. He did not live to see Walt Disney World open its gates in Florida. He did not live to see how far his empire would eventually stretch into television, into theme parks around the globe, into a company that would still be shaping global entertainment generations after his death. What he did live to see, and what he built with his own hands from the wreckage of repeated failure, was proof of something simple and enduring, that losing everything is not the same as being finished. 3 times, maybe 4, his early ventures collapsed into bankruptcy. His first true creation, Oswald the Rabbit, was taken from him by men who understood contracts better than dreams. Bankers doubted him. Critics mocked his biggest ideas as folly, right up until the moment those ideas reshaped the world. Each time, Walt Disney did not disappear. He picked up a pencil. He started again. That, more than any castle or parade, is the real story behind the name. A reminder that the difference between an ordinary failure and an extraordinary legacy is rarely talent alone. It is the refusal to stop rebuilding, one sketch, one contract, one impossible idea at a time.